The crystal wine glass trembled in my hand as Daniel's words cut through the silence of our Manhattan penthouse. Choose your career or me, Isabella. I'm done with this. I set the glass down carefully on our marble coffee table, the one Daniel had insisted we buy to impress his business associates, the same associates who never bothered to learn my name, referring to me only as Daniel's wife when they acknowledged my existence at all. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. You spend more time at that office than you do with your own husband, Daniel continued, pacing across our living room like a caged animal. His designer suit was perfectly pressed, his dark hair immaculately styled, but his eyes held a fury I'd learned to recognize over our 3 years of marriage. What kind of wife abandons her family for some meaningless job? I wanted to laugh. Meaningless job. If only he knew. Daniel, you know my work is important. Important? You're a mid-level analyst at some tech consulting firm nobody's ever heard of. How is that more important than our marriage? The lies I'd built our entire relationship on sat heavy in my chest. Daniel believed I worked for Tech Vision Consulting, a small firm downtown. He'd never questioned why my meaningless job required international travel, why I received calls at all hours, why I sometimes disappeared into my home office for entire weekends. He'd never wondered why my salary seemed so modest for someone who contributed equally to our expensive lifestyle. "Your mother is right," Daniel said, and my blood ran cold. Helena Morales, his mother, had been staying with us for the past week, and every day had been a masterclass in psychological warfare. As if summoned by her son's words, Helena's heels clicked across the hardwood floor. She entered the room with the regal bearing she'd cultivated since her family's fortune had dwindled to nothing. Her silver hair was pulled back severely, and her dark eyes held the same calculating look that had made my life miserable since the day Daniel brought me home. "Isabella, darling," Helena said, her voice dripping with false sweetness. "Daniel and I were just discussing your priorities." I remained silent, watching both of them with the same careful attention I'd learned to use in boardrooms filled with hostile investors, the skill of appearing calm while internally calculating every possible outcome. "A wife's place is beside her husband," Helena continued, settling into the armchair across from me like a judge taking the bench. "When I was young, women understood that supporting our husbands was our greatest contribution to society. We didn't need to chase after careers to prove our worth." "Times have changed, Helena," I said quietly. "Have they? Because from where I'm sitting, it looks like you're using work to avoid dealing with our problems. When was the last time you were fully present during dinner? When did you last put your phone away for an entire evening?" The irony wasn't lost on me. Daniel, who checked his stock portfolio obsessively and took client calls during our anniversary dinner, was lecturing me about presence. "I've been thinking," Helena said, examining her manicured nails. "Perhaps Isabella would benefit from seeing how a real marriage works. My friend Carmen's daughter, Rachel, just celebrated her 5th wedding anniversary. Do you know what Rachel does for work, Isabella?" I didn't respond, knowing the question was rhetorical. "Nothing," Helena said with satisfaction. "She doesn't work outside the home at all. She dedicates herself entirely to supporting her husband's career, managing their household, and preparing for children. And do you know what her husband gave her for their anniversary?" She paused dramatically. "A house in the Hamptons, because he knows his wife's value isn't measured by some paycheck from strangers, but by her devotion to their partnership." Daniel nodded eagerly. "Exactly. Rachel understands what marriage means. She doesn't put her own selfish ambitions above her family." Selfish ambitions. The words hit me like physical blows. If only they knew that my selfish ambitions had built something extraordinary, that while they spoke of devotion and partnership, I'd been quietly revolutionizing an entire industry. "You were lucky I chose you, Isabella," Daniel said, his voice softer now, but somehow more cutting. "You weren't exactly fighting off suitors when we met. You should be grateful you found someone willing to provide for you. The manipulation was so practiced, so calculated, that I almost admired its efficiency. Almost. So, what's it gonna be? Daniel asked, crossing his arms. Are you going to quit that job and focus on our marriage, or do I need to find someone who actually wants to be a wife? I looked at both of them, Helena with her superior smile, Daniel with his entitled expectation, and felt something shift inside me. A clarity I hadn't experienced in years. I need time to think, I said finally. Daniel's face lit up with triumph. Good, because I've already made it clear to several people that you'll be stepping back from work to focus on family. I won't be embarrassed by having a wife who cares more about strangers than her own husband. As they continued talking about my future they were planning without me, I excused myself to my home office, the room Daniel dismissed as my little workspace, where I supposedly handled minor administrative tasks. If only he knew that from this very desk, I'd been quietly building an empire. The elevator doors slid shut behind me with a soft whisper, and I finally allowed myself to breathe. The 20th floor of the Meridian Tower was mine. Every gleaming surface, every piece of cutting-edge technology, every carefully chosen detail that spoke to power and precision. Good morning, Miss Torres. My assistant Marcus nodded as I passed his desk. To him, I wasn't Daniel's wife or Helena's disappointing daughter-in-law. I was the woman who'd built CloudNex from a bedroom startup into a global technology empire. My corner office overlooked the Hudson River, the floor-to-ceiling windows offering a view that most executives would kill for. But it wasn't the view that mattered. It was what I'd built here, in secret, while my husband dismissed my ambitions as meaningless. Victor's waiting for you, Marcus said, gesturing toward the conference room. Victor Delgado sat at the head of the polished table, his silver hair and weathered face telling the story of decades spent in boardrooms and negotiations. When I first pitched my cloud computing concept 5 years ago, he was the only investor who didn't ask me to bring my husband or father to the next meeting. Isabella, he stood as I entered, a gesture of respect that still caught me off guard after years of being dismissed by Daniel. I've been reviewing the quarterly reports. I poured myself coffee from the silver service, a small luxury I allowed myself in the space where pretense fell away. And $890 million. Victor's eyes sparkled with pride. Your company is now worth $890 million. The number hung in the air between us, substantial and surreal. Last night, Daniel had lectured me about the importance of supporting his $40,000 a year insurance sales career. He'd spoken of my meaningless job while sitting in a penthouse I'd purchased with my meaningless income. The Asian markets are particularly strong, Victor continued, sliding a tablet across the table. Tokyo and Singapore are requesting expansion meetings for next quarter. I scrolled through the figures, revenue streams I'd developed, partnerships I'd negotiated, innovations that bore my fingerprints. While Helena had been telling me about Rachel's domestic perfection, I'd been revolutionizing how Fortune 500 companies manage their data infrastructure. There's something else, Victor said, his tone shifting. Anthony Vega called. Anthony Vega. The name sent a familiar chill through me. Part excitement, part wariness. CEO of Tech Dynamic, CloudNex's biggest competitor, and the man who'd been trying to buy me out for the past 18 months. He had no idea he'd been negotiating with a woman he'd once dismissed at an industry conference as probably someone's assistant. What did he want? He's increased his offer to $1.2 billion. I set down my coffee cup carefully. He still thinks he's negotiating with you. He does. Which brings me to something we need to discuss. Victor's expression grew serious. Isabella, this can't continue forever. You're the true CEO of a billion-dollar company. You deserve the recognition, the respect, the acknowledgement of what you've built. The acknowledgement comes with risks you know I can't afford, I said quietly. Victor leaned forward. Your husband would try to claim half in a divorce? I almost laughed. If Daniel knew the truth, claiming half would be the least of his schemes. He'd want control, management, and the right to make decisions about my company. He'd bring Helena into it, and they'd systematically dismantle everything I'd built while convincing themselves they were helping me succeed. It's more complicated than money, Victor. Is it? Or are you still protecting people who don't deserve protection? Before I could answer, my phone buzzed. Sophia's name appeared on the screen. And despite everything, I smiled. My younger sister, the only person in my family who knew the truth. Take it, Victor said. I'll review the Singapore projections. I stepped onto my private balcony, the city sprawling below me like a circuit board I'd helped design. Please tell me you didn't let him bully you into quitting, Sophia said without preamble.
Hello to you too. Isabella, I'm serious. I could hear it in your voice last night, that flat, defeated tone you get when you're considering giving up pieces of yourself to keep the peace. Sophia had always been able to read me too easily. While our parents had focused on her artistic pursuits, dismissing them as impractical but lovingly supporting them nonetheless, they'd expected me to be practical, responsible, invisible. Sophia was the only one who'd celebrated when I've gotten my first major client. The only one who'd believed I could build something extraordinary. Daniel gave me an ultimatum. Of course he did. And I told him I needed time to think. Time to think about what? Whether you should abandon the company you built with your own brilliance to make him feel better about his inadequacies? Through the glass, I could see Victor pointing at charts, probably calculating growth projections that would make Daniel's yearly income look like a rounding error. Sophia, it's not that simple. It is exactly that simple. Her voice was fierce, protective in a way that reminded me why she was the only family member I trusted with my secret. You have built something incredible. You employ hundreds of people. You've revolutionized an entire industry. And you're considering throwing it away because some man who married you, thinking you'd be convenient and controllable, is throwing a tantrum? What if I lose everything? What if you do? You'll still be the woman who built a billion-dollar company from nothing. You'll still be brilliant, creative, and capable of building another empire if you wanted to. But Isabella, what happens if you stay? What happens to your soul if you spend the rest of your life pretending to be small? After I hung up, I stood on my balcony for a long time, watching the city pulse with energy and ambition. Somewhere out there, Daniel was probably telling his colleagues about his wife's upcoming career change. Helena was likely planning my transformation into the perfect society wife. None of them had any idea that the woman they were reshaping was already one of the most powerful executives in the country. Isabella, Victor appeared in the doorway. Anthony Vega is here. He says it's urgent. I turned, surprising myself with how steady I felt. Show him in. It was time to start making some decisions about who I really was and who I was ready to become. The apartment felt different when I returned that evening, like a stage set waiting for a performance I no longer wanted to give. Daniel was in the kitchen, opening a bottle of wine, the expensive Bordeaux we typically saved for special occasions. "There's my wife," he said, his mood dramatically improved from our morning confrontation. "I thought we'd have a nice dinner. Helena made reservations at Chez Laurent." Helena emerged from the guest room wearing one of her signature black dresses, the kind that announced her presence before she spoke. "Elena, darling, you look tired. Perhaps you should consider that another sign that you're overextending yourself." I set down my purse, buying myself a moment to study both of their faces. Daniel's satisfaction, Helena's calculating smile. They believed they'd won, that my request for time to think was merely a face-saving delay before inevitable surrender. "Before dinner," I said carefully, "I'd like to ask you both something." Daniel poured wine into 3 glasses, the liquid catching the light from our chandelier. "Of course. What's on your mind?" "Daniel, what would you do if I were more successful than you?" He paused mid-pour, then laughed, a sound with no humor in it. "That's a strange question." "Is it? I'm just curious. Hypothetically, What if my career advancement potential exceeded yours? Helena's smile tightened almost imperceptibly. Isabella, dear, there's no need for hypotheticals. We're dealing with reality here. But I pressed on, something reckless and truthful rising in my chest. Just imagine, Daniel, what if I earned more money than you? What if I had more influence, more recognition? Daniel's laughter grew louder, more incredulous. Bella, sweetheart, that's never going to happen. Men lead, women follow. It's basic biology, basic economics, basic common sense. But if it did,
It won't. His tone shifted, becoming patronizing in a way that made my skin crawl. You're a mid-level analyst at a consulting firm nobody's heard of. I'm building a client base, establishing myself in sales. In 5 years, I'll be making 6 figures, while you'll probably still be doing whatever it is you do in that little office. That little office, I repeated softly. Don't misunderstand me, Daniel said, apparently interpreting my quiet tone as hurt rather than fury. There's nothing wrong with having a modest job, but let's be realistic about our respective potentials. Helena nodded approvingly. Daniel has vision, Isabella. He understands market dynamics, client relationships, long-term strategic planning. These are skills that translate into real success. I watched them speak about my limitations with such confidence, such certainty. They were describing a version of me that had never existed, the small, manageable woman Daniel thought he'd married. What about respect? I asked. In this hypothetical scenario where I achieved more success, would you respect my accomplishments? Respect? Daniel looked genuinely puzzled. Bella, I respect you plenty. You're my wife. But success isn't just about money or titles. It's about understanding your role, contributing to the partnership appropriately. And what's my role? Support me. Support us. He gestured between himself and Helena. Making our family stronger, more stable, creating a foundation so I can take the kinds of risks that lead to real achievement. Helena leaned forward, her eyes bright with missionary zeal. Isabella, I have a wonderful example for you. Do you know Carmen's daughter-in-law, Elena? She was quite career-focused when she married Carmen's son, Miguel. She was working at some law firm, very intense, very demanding hours. I waited, knowing the story was meant to be instructional. Well, Elena realized that her career ambitions were actually undermining Miguel's confidence. He needed a wife who believed in him completely, who wasn't distracted by her own pursuits. So she made the beautiful choice to step back from law and focus on building Miguel's practice. She handles his administrative work now, manages his calendar, and entertains his clients. And Miguel's practice flourished, Daniel added enthusiastically. He's one of the most successful attorneys in his firm now. Their marriage is stronger than ever. Elena sacrificed her career for her husband's success. She redirected her career. She found a more meaningful application for her skills. Instead of competing with Miguel, she became his greatest asset. I sipped my wine, tasting the irony more than the vintage. What if Elena had been the more talented attorney? Both of them looked at me as if I'd suggested the earth was flat. That's not how successful marriages work, Isabella, Daniel said with exaggerated patience. One person leads, one person follows. Guess which gender is naturally suited for which role? Marriage isn't a business partnership between equals. It's a complementary relationship where each person contributes according to their strengths. Men provide direction and resources. Women provide support and stability. I set down my wine glass and looked at both of them. Really looked. Daniel with his expensive suit and modest ambitions, so certain of his superiority. Helena with her faded elegance and bitter worldview, reshaping every example to fit her narrow vision of how relationships should function. What if I refused? I asked quietly. Refused what? Daniel's voice held a warning note. What if I refused to be smaller so you could feel bigger? The temperature in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees. Daniel's face flushed, and Helena's composure cracked just enough to reveal the steel beneath. Isabella, said Helena slowly,
You're being very ungrateful. Daniel chose you when he could have chosen anyone. He's offering you security, status, a beautiful life. Most women would be thankful for such devotion. And if I'm not most women, Daniel slammed his wineglass down hard enough to make the sound ring through the apartment. Then maybe you need to find someone who's willing to deal with your ingratitude and selfishness. The words hung in the air like a challenge, or like an opportunity. Maybe I should.
For the first time since I'd known him, Daniel looked uncertain, as if he'd expected me to apologize, to back down, to choose the safety of his conditional love over the risk of independence. "You don't mean that," he said. I looked at him, really looked at the man I'd married, the man who loved me only as long as I remained small enough to fit into his vision of what a wife should be. The man who had no idea he was threatening to divorce one of the most powerful women in the country. Don't I? The question settled between us like a gauntlet thrown down, and for the first time in our marriage, I wasn't afraid of his answer. I woke up the next morning to find Daniel already dressed in his best suit, the navy Armani I'd bought him for his birthday last year. He was standing in front of our bedroom mirror, adjusting his tie with the careful precision of a man preparing for battle. "We need to talk," he said, without turning around. Helena was waiting in the living room when I emerged, seated in the same chair she'd occupied during yesterday's interrogation. But this time, there was something different in her expression, a cold satisfaction that made my stomach clench. "Isabella, please sit," Daniel said, gesturing to the couch. His tone was formal, distant, as if I were a business associate rather than his wife. I remained standing. Something about the staged nature of their positioning, the carefully orchestrated atmosphere, told me I wanted to maintain whatever advantage height might give me. Daniel reached into his briefcase and withdrew a manila folder, setting it on the coffee table with deliberate ceremony. "I've been thinking about what you said last night." "Have you?" "About refusing to be smaller. About finding someone else." He opened the folder, revealing a stack of legal documents. "I think you're right. Maybe you should find someone else." My eyes scanned the top page, recognizing the legal language immediately. "Divorce papers, professionally prepared, thoroughly researched, already filled out with both our names." "You had these drawn up before our conversation last night?" I said, not a question, but a statement. Helena's smile was razor-sharp. "Daniel is a forward-thinking man, Isabella. He anticipated that you might make the wrong choice." I looked at the papers, then at Daniel's face. He was watching me with barely concealed eagerness, waiting for the shock, the tears, the desperate plea for reconciliation he clearly expected. "I see you've been busy," I said calmly. 3 years, Isabella. 3 years I've tried to make this work." Daniel's voice took on the wounded tone he used when he wanted to paint himself as the victim. 3 years of competing with your job for your attention. 3 years of watching you choose strangers over your own husband." "Strangers," I repeated softly. "Yes, strangers. People who mean nothing to you, who don't love you the way I do." He leaned forward, his expression shifting to what he probably thought was sincere concern. "Isabella, you're throwing away everything we built together for what? A paycheck from people who would replace you tomorrow without thinking twice?" The irony was so perfect, so complete, that I had to bite the inside of my cheek from keeping from laughing. Daniel, who made $40,000 a year selling insurance policies, was lecturing me on being replaceable while sitting in a penthouse I purchased with my meaningless job. "I've already spoken to a lawyer," Helena said, pulling out her own folder. "We want to make this as easy as possible for everyone involved." She slid a second set of papers across the table. "These are the terms. Very fair, very reasonable. You keep your personal belongings, your car, whatever small savings account you have. Daniel keeps the apartment, the joint accounts, the investments. I picked up the papers, scanning the asset division. They'd listed our penthouse at $2.8 million. The joint investments totaled another $1.2 million. All of it purchased with my income, all of it about to be handed to Daniel because his name was on the deeds and accounts. Of course, Helena continued, we understand you'll need time to find a new living situation. Daniel is prepared to be generous with the timeline. How generous? 30 days. That should be plenty of time for someone with your resources to find suitable accommodation.
Suitable accommodations. He was expecting me to move into a studio apartment somewhere, maybe find a roommate, and live like the struggling mid-level analyst he believed me to be. "This is what you want?" I asked, looking directly at Daniel. "It's what's best for both of us," he said, but I caught the uncertainty that flickered across his features. "Isabella, you've made it clear that you're not willing to prioritize our marriage. I can't compete with your career ambitions anymore." "My career ambitions?" "Yes, your need to prove yourself, to chase after some imaginary success that's never going to materialize." His voice hardened. "I deserve a wife who wants to build a life with me, not someone who sees marriage as an inconvenience." Helena nodded approvingly. "Daniel has so much potential, Isabella. He deserves a partner who recognizes that, who's willing to invest in their shared future, rather than pursuing selfish dreams." I looked at both of them, Daniel with his wounded pride and manufactured righteousness, Helena with her bitter satisfaction at orchestrating my downfall. They were so certain of their victory, so convinced that I had no choice but to beg for mercy or accept defeat. "Where do I sign?" I asked. Daniel blinked, clearly thrown off script. "What?" "Where do I sign? You want a divorce? I'll give you a divorce." I picked up the pen Helena had thoughtfully provided and flipped to the signature page. "Here?" "Isabella, wait." Daniel's confidence cracked, replaced by confusion. "Don't you want to discuss the terms? Try to negotiate?" "Why would I negotiate?" I signed my name with steady strokes, the signature I used on billion-dollar contracts. These seem perfectly fair. I signed the second set of papers with equal calm, then slid both folders back across the table. "There. Done." Helena's satisfied expression faltered. "You're not upset?" "Should I be? You've both made your positions very clear. Daniel wants a wife who will make herself smaller so he can feel bigger. I can't be that wife." I stood, smoothing down my skirt. "So this is the best solution for everyone." Daniel stood too, reaching toward me as if to stop me from leaving. "Bella, I didn't think... we don't have to rush into this. Maybe we could try counseling or..." "Counseling?" I turned back to face him, and something in my expression made him take a step back. "Daniel, you just asked me to choose between my identity and your insecurity. You made that choice easy." "Your identity?" Helena's voice was sharp, suspicious. "Isabella, you're a low-level employee at a small consulting firm. That's not an identity, that's just a job." I looked at her for a long moment. This woman who'd spent months trying to reshape me into her vision of acceptable femininity. This woman who had no idea she'd just convinced her son to divorce one of the most powerful executives in the country. "You're right, Helena. It is just a job." I walked toward the door, then paused. "I'll have my things moved out by the end of the week." "Isabella, wait!" Daniel called after me. "We should talk about this more. I don't think you understand what you're walking away from." I turned back one final time, studying the man I'd married, the man who'd loved me only as long as I stayed small enough to fit his expectations. "Daniel," I said quietly,
I don't think you understand what you're walking away from." As I left the apartment, our apartment, soon to be his apartment, I felt something I hadn't experienced in years. Not relief exactly, and not sadness. Freedom. For the first time in my marriage, I was free to be exactly who I was. Standing in my empty corner office that afternoon, I let myself remember how it all began. The late nights, the sacrifices, the years of building something extraordinary while everyone around me assumed I was ordinary. It started in my tiny studio apartment 7 years ago, back when I was actually working as a mid-level analyst at a consulting firm nobody had heard of. Daniel wasn't entirely wrong about my beginnings. He just had no idea how far I'd traveled from them. I'd been coding since high school, but my computer science degree had landed me in the kind of entry-level position where ambition went to die. 40 hours a week analyzing other people's data, fixing other people's problems, implementing other people's solutions. I came home exhausted every day, not from the work itself, but from the suffocating feeling that my brain was slowly atrophying. The idea for CloudNext came to me during a particularly frustrating project where I watched my company's outdated infrastructure fail a major client. I could see the solution so clearly.
Seamless, cloud-based system that would revolutionize how businesses managed their data. But when I presented the concept to my supervisor, he dismissed it with a condescending smile. "Isabella, we appreciate your enthusiasm, but leave the big picture thinking to the senior team." That night, I went home to my studio apartment and started coding. Not for my company, not for my supervisor, but for myself. I worked from 6 p.m. to 2 a.m. every weeknight, surviving on coffee and the kind of determination that only comes from being consistently underestimated. The first prototype took me 4 months. I tested it on small freelance projects, refining the interface and strengthening the security protocols. When I finally had something worth showing, I made a list of investors and started scheduling meetings. The rejections were swift and brutal. "This is interesting work, Miss Torres, but do you have a more senior colleague who could walk us through the technical specifications? Have you considered partnering with someone who has more business development experience? The concept is solid, but we typically prefer to work with founding teams that include male leadership." That last one hadn't been said directly, but it hung in every conference room where I was the only woman, the only person under 40, the only one whose vision was questioned before it was understood. I was about to give up when Sophia convinced me to attend one more networking event. "Isabella, you've built something revolutionary. Don't let their fear of your brilliance make you think you're wrong." Sophia had always believed in me more than I believed in myself. While our parents had focused on her artistic talents, she'd been the one cheering me on through late-night coding sessions, bringing me dinner when I forgot to eat, listening to my presentations until I could recite them perfectly. At that networking event, I met Victor Delgado. He was older than the other investors, more seasoned, and when I started explaining CloudNext, he actually listened. Not politely, not condescendingly, but with the sharp attention of someone who recognized innovation when he heard it. "How long have you been working on this?" 8 months. "By yourself?" "Yes." "Impressive." He leaned back in his chair, studying me. "Isabella, I'm going to be direct with you. This industry is brutal for women, especially young women. You're going to face investors who doubt your technical skills, clients who want to speak to your boss, competitors who assume you're someone's assistant." My heart sank. Another rejection more artfully delivered than most. "But," Victor continued, "you've built something extraordinary here. And I think I know how we can protect it, and you, while it grows." That's when he proposed the arrangement that would define the next 5 years of my life. Victor would serve as the public face of CloudNext, taking meetings, handling press, absorbing the skepticism and bias that I'd face as a young female CEO. I would remain behind the scenes, directing strategy,
overseeing development, making every major decision while he provided the gravitas and credibility the industry seemed to require. You'll be the true CEO. I'll just be the mask you wear until you're powerful enough not to need one. The arrangement felt like surrender at first. After months of fighting to be taken seriously, I was choosing invisibility. But as CloudNext grew, from our first major client to our first million in revenue to our first acquisition, I realized Victor had given me something more valuable than recognition. He'd given me time. Time to build without interference. Time to make mistakes without them being attributed to my gender or age. Time to become genuinely formidable before anyone realized what I was building. During those years, I met and married Daniel. He'd seemed safe, uncomplicated, content with his modest ambitions. I had thought I could maintain my double life indefinitely, successful CEO by day, supportive wife by night. But Daniel's need for control had grown alongside my hidden success. Every business trip became an interrogation. Every late night at the office became evidence of my disloyalty. Every moment I spent building my empire was a moment stolen from his ego. Helena's arrival had accelerated everything. Her constant criticism, her stories about proper wives, her obvious belief that I was beneath her son, it had all crystallized into the ultimatum that finally forced me to choose.
Looking out at the city from my office window, I thought about Elena, the lawyer Helena had mentioned, the woman who'd redirected her career to support her husband's ambitions. I wondered if Elena had built something beautiful before she was convinced to tear it down. I wondered if she ever stood in her kitchen, managing Miguel's calendar, and remembered what it felt like to use her full intelligence. I pulled out my phone and called Sophia. "Please tell me you signed those papers," she said immediately. "I signed them." "Good, because I've been thinking about what you should wear to the Tech Summit keynote next week." The Tech Summit. CloudNext was scheduled to make a major announcement, the unveiling of our latest platform that would revolutionize data security for financial institutions. Victor was supposed to give the presentation, as he had for every major milestone. "Sophia, I can't." "You can. Isabella, you've been hiding long enough. It's time for the world to know who you really are." After I hung up, I sat in the gathering darkness of my office, surrounded by the evidence of what I'd built. Patents bearing my innovations, contracts with my signature, awards for companies I'd acquired, technologies I'd developed, markets I'd revolutionized. Daniel had asked me to choose between my career and our marriage, never realizing he was asking me to choose between my identity and his comfort. Tomorrow I will stop hiding. Tomorrow the world would learn that the meek wife who'd been dismissed and discarded was actually one of the most powerful women in technology. Tomorrow I will finally introduce myself. Jacob K. Javits Convention Center buzzed with the energy of 3,000 tech executives, journalists, and innovators gathered for the industry's most prestigious annual summit. I stood backstage, watching Victor make final adjustments to his tie, a ritual we'd performed dozens of times over the years. But this time was different. "Are you sure about this, Isabella?" Victor asked, his usual confidence replaced by protective concern. "Once we do this, there's no going back. Your privacy, your safety net, it all disappears." I smoothed the jacket of my tailored navy suit, the one I'd chosen specifically for this moment. Power dressing, Sophia had called it, the armor of a woman ready to claim her throne. "Victor, I've been hiding for 5 years. I built CloudNext from my studio apartment while everyone around me assumed I was too small, too insignificant to matter. Yesterday, my own husband divorced me because he couldn't imagine I might be more successful than him." "Are you doing this for revenge?" I considered his question seriously. Was this about punishing Daniel and Helena? About proving them wrong? Or was it about something deeper? About finally becoming the woman I'd always been, but never dared to show the world? I'm doing this because I'm tired of being afraid of my own success. The stage manager appeared, headset crackling with chatter. Mr. Delgado, you're on in 5 minutes. Victor turned to me one final time. Isabella Torres, CEO of Cloudnex. It has a nice ring to it. I watched him walk toward the stage, this man who'd protected my secret for half a decade, who'd absorbed every doubt and dismissal meant for me. In 5 minutes, he would do the most generous thing any mentor could do for a protege. He would step aside. The auditorium fell silent as Victor took the podium, his presence commanding the attention of industry titans, venture capitalists, and technology journalists from around the world. I could see the front row from my position backstage. Anthony Vega sat third from the left, his expression skeptical as always. Anthony, the man who'd spent 18 months trying to acquire Cloudnex, never suspecting he'd been negotiating with a woman he'd once dismissed as probably someone's assistant at a conference 3 years ago. Ladies and gentlemen, Victor began, his voice carrying the authority of decades in Silicon Valley. Today marks a significant milestone in Cloudnex's evolution. For 5 years, I've had the privilege of serving as the public face of this company while working alongside the most brilliant strategic mind I've ever encountered. Murmurs rippled through the audience. This wasn't the standard corporate presentation they'd expected.
Cloudnex didn't begin in a garage or a dorm room, Victor continued. It began in a small studio apartment in Queens, developed by a young woman who saw solutions where established experts saw only problems. The murmurs grew louder. Several journalists were already pulling out their phones. That woman coded our first prototype while working full-time as a data analyst. She secured our initial funding despite being told repeatedly that investors preferred male leadership. She designed every major innovation we've announced over the past 5 years. From my position backstage, I could see Anthony Vega leaning forward, his skeptical expression shifting to intense interest. Today, I'm honored to introduce you to the true founder and CEO of Cloudnex, a company now valued at $890 million. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Isabella Torres. The applause began before I reached the podium, building to a crescendo as I stepped into the spotlight. 5 years of hiding, of deflecting credit, of allowing others to speak for my achievements. It all fell away as I faced an audience of my peers for the first time as myself. "Thank you, Victor," I said, my voice steady, despite the adrenaline coursing through my veins. "And thank you for 5 years of believing in me even when I struggled to believe in myself." The applause continued, and I used the moment to scan the audience. Phones were recording, journalists were typing, industry leaders were reassessing everything they thought they knew about Cloudnex. 5 years ago, I walked into my first investor meeting with a revolutionary idea and was told I needed a more senior colleague to explain the technical specifications. Today, those same specifications power data management systems for 60% of Fortune 500 companies. Laughter rippled through the crowd. Not mockery, but recognition of an experience many of them had witnessed or endured. I want to talk to you today about the hidden cost of underestimation, about what happens when brilliant minds are dismissed before they're heard, about the innovations we lose when we allow bias to override merit. For the next 30 minutes, I presented Cloudnex's latest breakthrough, an AI-driven security protocol that would fundamentally change how financial institutions protected customer data. But more importantly, I presented myself, not as Victor's protege or Daniel's wife or Helena's disappointing daughter-in-law, but as the woman who'd built all of this from nothing. The standing ovation lasted 3 full minutes. As I left the stage, journalists swarmed, cameras flashed, and interview requests flooded in.
But it was Anthony Vega who reached me first, pushing through the crowd with the determination of a man who just realized he'd been outmaneuvered for years. "Isabella Torres," he said, extending his hand with a smile that mixed admiration with competitive respect. "I've been trying to buy your company for 18 months, and I never knew I was negotiating with you." "I remember you," I said, shaking his hand. "Tech Dynamics annual conference 3 years ago. You asked me to fetch you coffee." Anthony's face flushed, but his smile widened. "I did, and I'm betting that's not the most embarrassing mistake I've made regarding your company." "Probably not." "Isabella Torres," a CNN journalist interrupted, microphone extended. "How does it feel to be revealed as one of the most powerful women in technology?" I looked out at the crowd of reporters, executives, and competitors, all of them seeing me clearly for the first time. Somewhere in New York, Daniel and Helena were probably watching this coverage, realizing that the woman they'd dismissed as powerless was actually more successful than they'd ever imagined possible. "It feels," I said, "like I can finally stop hiding." As interviews continued and congratulations poured in, I thought about the studio apartment where this all began, about the nights I'd coded while others slept, about the rejections that had made me stronger, about the choice to hide that had ultimately prepared me for this moment of complete visibility. Daniel had asked me to choose between my career and our marriage. I'd chosen my career. But more than that, I'd chosen myself. And for the first time in 5 years, that felt like enough. The call came at 6:47 a.m., 3 days after my Tech Summit revelation. I was in my new corner suite at Cloudnex, no more hiding, no more secret meetings, reviewing acquisition proposals when my assistant Marcus appeared in the doorway. "Your ex-husband is on line 1, he said, with carefully neutral professionalism. "He's called 17 times since yesterday."
I looked at the blinking light on my phone, considering. Daniel had been trying to reach me since my face appeared on the cover of Forbes with the headline, "The Secret CEO, How Isabella Torres Built a Tech Empire While the World Wasn't Watching." "Transfer him to voicemail," I said. But Marcus hesitated. "Ma'am, he's persistent. He's also been calling the main office number, claiming there's a family emergency." I almost laughed. A family emergency. Now that Daniel knew what I was worth, everything had become an emergency. "Put him through." Daniel's voice came through the speaker, shaky with an emotion I couldn't quite identify. Desperation, maybe, or greed disguised as regret. "Bella, thank God. I've been trying to reach you for days." "It's Isabella now. What do you want, Daniel?" "What do I want?" His voice cracked slightly. "Bella, Isabella, I want to apologize. I made a terrible mistake. We both did. This divorce, this whole mess, we can fix this." I continued reviewing the acquisition proposal while he spoke, making notes in the margins. A biotech startup in Seattle. Promising, but overvalued. I'd need to negotiate them down by at least 30%. "Isabella, are you listening to me?" "I'm listening. You made a mistake. Continue." "I saw the news coverage. I saw what you've built, what you've accomplished. I'm proud of you. I always knew you were special, but this—" He paused, and I could hear Helena's voice in the background, sharp and insistent. "This is incredible what you've done. We should be celebrating together." "We should be celebrating?" "Yes, as husband and wife, as partners. Isabella, you're brilliant, you're successful, and I want to support you. I want to be part of this with you." I set down the acquisition proposal and leaned back in my chair, studying the city skyline through my floor-to-ceiling windows. "Daniel, 3 days ago you divorced me because I wouldn't quit my job. Now you want to be part of my success?" I was wrong. I was scared, I think. Scared of losing you to your work. But now I understand. Your work is extraordinary. You're extraordinary. Helena's voice grew louder in the background, and I caught fragments, "owes us," and
family loyalty, and ungrateful. Is Helena there with you? She's been helping me think through this situation. I see. And what conclusions have you reached? Daniel's voice grew more confident, as if he'd rehearsed this part. We've been thinking about the future, about how we can build something together now that everything's out in the open. Helena thinks, we both think, that despite the divorce papers, we're still connected, still family. Family. Yes, and families support each other. Isabella, you've achieved something incredible, but you did it while we were married. We were partners then, even if I didn't understand what kind of partner you needed. The audacity was breathtaking. Daniel, who demanded I abandon my career, was now claiming credit for supporting it. Helena, who had spent months telling me I was worthless, now wanted to claim family loyalty. What exactly are you proposing, Daniel? I think we should talk in person. Maybe we could have dinner, discuss how to move forward as a team. I know I hurt you, but I want to make it right. I heard papers shuffling in the background, then Helena's voice, clearer now. Tell her about the investment opportunity. Investment opportunity? Well, yes. I've been looking into expanding my insurance business. With the right capital investment, I could build something really significant, something worthy of being associated with Cloudnex. There it was, the real reason for his sudden change of heart, his newfound appreciation for my career. Daniel didn't want me back. He wanted my money. How much capital are you thinking?
Maybe $2 million to start? I know it sounds like a lot, but Isabella, you're worth almost $1 billion now. $2 million would set me up to build something substantial, something that would make you proud to be connected to me. I closed my eyes, remembering the man who had lectured me about knowing my place, who had dismissed my ambitions as selfish fantasies. Now, that same man was asking me to fund his dreams with the fortune he'd tried to force me to abandon. I need to think about it, I said finally. Of course. Take all the time you need. But Isabella, don't think too long. There are other investors interested, but I'd rather keep this in the family. After I hung up, I sat in the silence of my office, processing the conversation. Daniel's transparent greed, Helena's coaching from the sidelines, their assumption that my success somehow belonged to them by virtue of shared history. My phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. This is Helena. We need to discuss Isabella's obligations to family. Dinner tonight, 7 p.m., Chez Laurent. Don't disappoint us again. I forwarded the text to Sophia, who called immediately. The audacity, she said without preamble. They divorce you for being too ambitious, then demand dinner meetings when they realize how much you're worth? Helena seems to think I have obligations to them. Your only obligation is to yourself. Isabella, please tell me you're not actually considering giving Daniel money. I looked out at the city I'd conquered while everyone around me assumed I was powerless. I'm considering a lot of things. That afternoon, I received a call from my building's concierge. Daniel had been in the lobby for 3 hours, asking to be announced. When security tried to remove him, he'd claimed he lived there and was being illegally barred from his own home. He'd forgotten, apparently, that his name had never been on the deed. By evening, the calls had multiplied. Daniel, Helena, even some distant relatives who'd never shown interest in my life before my Forbes cover. All of them suddenly concerned about family relationships, all of them with ideas about how my success should be shared. I turned off my phone and worked late, reviewing the quarterly projections Victor had prepared. Cloudnex was positioned for unprecedented growth, our latest security platform generating interest from governments and corporations worldwide. I'd built this empire while being told I was worthless. I'd revolutionized an industry while being dismissed as incompetent. I'd become one of the most powerful women in technology while being treated as if my only value was my willingness to shrink myself. And now, the same people who demanded my smallness wanted to claim my greatness. As I locked my office that night, I made a decision. Daniel and Helena wanted to discuss my obligations to family. Fine.
We'd have that discussion, but they weren't going to like my conclusions. The attack came from an unexpected direction, buried in a technology blog I rarely read. The headline turned my coffee cold in my mouth. CloudNext CEO Isabella Torres, tech visionary or unstable fraud. I was reading the article at my desk when Victor burst through my office door, his usually composed demeanor shattered. Isabella, have you seen the Brennan report? I'm reading it now. My voice was steady, but inside, fury was building like a storm system. The article, written by a freelance journalist named Marcus Brennan, painted me as an unstable narcissist who had manipulated Victor into fronting my company while I dealt with personal psychological issues. The piece cited anonymous sources claiming I had violent mood swings, had been hospitalized for mental health crises, and was completely unfit for corporate leadership. It suggested that my 5-year secrecy was not strategic, but pathological, the behavior of someone too unstable to handle public scrutiny. "This is character assassination," Victor said. "Peer fabrication. Isabella, in 5 years, I've never seen you lose your composure. You're the most level-headed executive I know." I scrolled through the article, noting the specific details that could only have come from someone with intimate knowledge of my life. The reference to my modest apartment in Queens, information only Daniel knew. The mention of my tumultuous family relationships, something I'd confided only to my ex-husband during our marriage. "Victor, I need you to contact our legal team. This isn't random journalism. This is a coordinated attack." My phone buzzed with a text from Anthony Vega. "Saw the Brennan piece. This looks personal. Call me."
I dialed his number immediately. "Isabella." Anthony's voice was grim. "I've been in this industry long enough to recognize a hit piece when I see one. Someone wanted to destroy your credibility, and they fed this Brennan guy everything he needed." "Any idea who?" "Actually, yes. My security team does background checks on journalists who write about our industry. Marcus Brennan received a $20,000 payment 3 days ago from a shell company registered in Delaware." $20,000. The exact amount Daniel had mentioned needing for his marketing budget when he'd called yesterday, escalating his demands after I had ignored Helena's dinner invitation. "Can you trace the shell company?" "Already did. It's registered to Helena Morales." The pieces fell into place with sickening clarity. When I'd refused to fund Daniel's insurance business, when I'd ignored their demands for reconciliation dinners and family meetings, they decided to destroy what they couldn't control. "Anthony, I need a favor." "Name it." "I need everything you can find on Daniel Reyes and Helena Morales. Financial records, business dealings, anything that might be relevant to a legal case." "Isabella, what are you planning?" I looked out at the city skyline, the empire I'd built while being called worthless, the company I'd grown while being dismissed as incompetent. "I'm planning to show them what happens when you try to destroy someone who's more powerful than you realized." Within hours, Anthony's team had provided a comprehensive report that revealed the depth of Daniel and Helena's desperation. Daniel had been borrowing against our joint assets, the penthouse, the investment accounts, since our divorce was finalized. He'd taken out 3 high-interest loans, apparently convinced he could manipulate me into funding his failing ventures. Helena had been even more active. She'd reached out to multiple journalists offering to provide insider information about my unstable behavior and unfitness for leadership. The Brennan piece was just the first. She'd apparently promised similar stories to 5 other publications. But the most damaging discovery was Daniel's financial fraud. While we were married, he'd been siphoning money from our joint accounts to fund gambling debts I'd never known about. Sports betting, poker games, cryptocurrency investments that had failed spectacularly. The man who had lectured me about financial responsibility had stolen nearly $200,000 from accounts I'd funded with my CloudNext income. "This is enough for both civil and criminal charges," my legal team confirmed. "Wire fraud, defamation, identity theft. We can bury them both legally." I considered my options, remembering Helena's condescending smile when she'd handed me divorce papers.
Daniel's certainty I was too weak, too dependent to fight back. Their assumption that I'd be grateful for any scraps of attention they threw my way once my success became public. File everything, I said. Civil suits for defamation and fraud, criminal referrals where appropriate. And I want restraining orders preventing either of them from contacting me or my company. Isabella, Victor said quietly, are you sure? This will be public, messy. It might overshadow your professional achievements. I thought about that studio apartment where I'd coded CloudNext into existence, about every investor meeting where I'd been dismissed for someone's assistant, about Daniel's ultimatum and Helena's certainty I'd come crawling back. Victor, they tried to destroy my reputation because they couldn't control my success. They assumed I'd be too ashamed to fight back, too damaged to defend myself. I picked up the Forbes issue with my face on the cover, the one that had triggered their desperate schemes. They forgot that the woman who built a billion-dollar company while being called worthless isn't someone who breaks easily. The next morning, every major business publication ran the story. CloudNext CEO takes legal action against ex-husband's defamation campaign. The evidence was overwhelming, the narrative clear. Daniel and Helena hadn't just attacked me, they'd attacked one of the most successful companies in the technology sector. By noon, 3 more journalists had come forward, revealing that Helena had approached them with similar false stories. By evening, Daniel's insurance company had fired him for the publicity scandal. Anthony called as I was leaving the office. Isabella, I have to ask, how does it feel to watch them realize they picked a fight with someone who could destroy them?
I considered his question as I walked through the lobby of Meridian Tower, past the bronze plaque that read, CloudNext Global Headquarters. Every person who passed me knew exactly who I was now. Not Daniel's wife or Helena's disappointment, but the woman who'd revolutionized an industry. It feels, I said finally, like justice. The courtroom was smaller than I'd expected, but then again, Daniel and Helena's legal strategy had collapsed so completely that the proceedings had become more formal than battle. I sat in the front row with my legal team, watching my ex-husband and his mother try to maintain their dignity while their lawyers whispered increasingly desperate suggestions. Judge Patricia Williams had made her opinion clear from the opening statements. The evidence against Daniel and Helena was so overwhelming that their attorneys had spent most of the morning trying to negotiate plea agreements rather than defending their actions. Your Honor, Daniel's lawyer said, his voice strained, my client acknowledges that mistakes were made, but we believe the plaintiff's response has been disproportionate to the— Disproportionate? Judge Williams interrupted. Mr. Brennan, your client orchestrated a defamation campaign against one of the most successful executives in New York, committed wire fraud, and violated multiple restraining orders. Which part of Ms. Torres's response do you find excessive? I watched Daniel shift uncomfortably in his seat, his expensive suit, the same Armani I'd bought him last year, looking somehow shabby under the courtroom's fluorescent lights. Helena sat beside him, her usual regal composure replaced by tight-lipped fury. Furthermore, the judge continued, the evidence shows this wasn't a momentary lapse in judgment, but a calculated attempt to destroy Ms. Torres's professional reputation when she refused to fund your client's business ventures. The prosecutor, a sharp woman named Janet Reyes, approached the bench with a folder full of evidence. Your Honor, the defendant made numerous attempts to extort money from Ms. Torres after learning of her company's valuation. When she refused, he and his mother, Helena Morales, conspired to damage her reputation through false allegations provided to multiple journalists. Ms. Torres, Judge Williams addressed me directly, would you like to make a statement before sentencing? I stood, smoothing my navy suit, the same one I'd worn to my Tech Summit revelation. For a moment, I looked at Daniel and Helena, these people who had spent years trying to convince me I was worthless. Your Honor, 3 months ago, my ex-husband gave me an ultimatum, choose my career or our marriage. He assumed I would choose him because he believed my work was meaningless and my success was impossible. Daniel's face flushed, and I could see him struggling not to interrupt.
When I chose my career, he and his mother concluded that I was betraying family obligations. They believed my company's success somehow belonged to them, that I owed them financial support despite their years of dismissing my capabilities. I paused, gathering my thoughts. Your Honor, this case isn't really about defamation or wire fraud, though both crimes were committed. It's about what happens when people who've spent years making someone feel small suddenly realize that person has become powerful. Continue, Miss Torres. Daniel and Helena couldn't accept that the woman they'd underestimated had built something extraordinary, so they tried to destroy what they couldn't control. They attempted to reduce my life's work to psychological instability, my achievements to manipulation, my success to fraud. I looked directly at Helena, whose dark eyes were filled with the kind of rage that comes from having the natural order overturned. But, Your Honor, I didn't build CloudNext to prove them wrong. I built it because I had a vision for revolutionizing how businesses manage their data. I didn't hide my identity for 5 years to spite them. I did it to protect my work from people who would have tried to diminish it. The defamation campaign they launched wasn't just an attack on me personally, it was an attack on every woman who's been told she is not capable of building something significant. It was an attempt to prove that successful women must be unstable, manipulative, or fraudulent. Judge Williams nodded approvingly. Miss Torres, your company employs how many people? 837 full-time employees, Your Honor, plus approximately 200 contractors worldwide. And your annual revenue. This year, we're projected to exceed $400 million. Mr. Reyes, Judge Williams addressed Daniel directly, you attempted to destroy a company that employs nearly 900 people and generates hundreds of millions of dollars because your ex-wife wouldn't give you money for your insurance business.
Daniel's voice was barely audible. I made mistakes, Your Honor. You made criminal choices, Mr. Reyes. Ms. Morales, you coordinated with multiple journalists to spread false information about a prominent business leader. Did you consider the impact on Ms. Torres's employees, her clients, her shareholders? Helena's composure cracked completely. She owes us loyalty. I helped raise Daniel. I supported their marriage. Ms. Morales, the judge's voice cut through Helena's protest. You supported their marriage by consistently telling Ms. Torres she was worthless and demanding she abandon her career? The courtroom fell silent, except for Helena's sharp intake of breath. Judge Williams reviewed her notes one final time. Mr. Reyes, you're sentenced to 18 months in federal prison for wire fraud and criminal defamation. Ms. Morales, you'll serve 6 months and pay a $50,000 fine for your role in the defamation conspiracy. The gavel came down with a finality that seemed to echo through the small courtroom. As court security led Daniel and Helena away, Daniel turned back toward me one last time. His face held a mixture of disbelief and something that might have been regret. Isabella, he called out, his voice breaking slightly. I never meant for it to go this far. I couldn't understand how you became so much more than I thought you were. I looked at him, this man who had married me thinking I was safe and manageable, who had divorced me when he realized I wouldn't stay small, who had tried to destroy me when he discovered I was powerful. Daniel, I said quietly, I was always exactly who I am now. You just refused to see it. As they disappeared through the courthouse doors, I felt something I hadn't expected. Not triumph, not vindication, but a profound sense of completion. The woman who had been told to choose between her identity and her relationships had chosen herself and won. Outside the courthouse, reporters clustered around me, cameras rolling, questions flying. But for once, I wasn't thinking about public perception or corporate messaging. I was thinking about that studio apartment in Queens, about the nights I'd coded while others slept, about the dream I'd protected by hiding it from people who would have tried to kill it. Ms. Torres, a journalist called out, what's next for you and CloudNext? I smiled, feeling truly free for the first time in years. We're going to keep building the future. 6 months after the courthouse doors closed on Daniel and Helena, I stood in my penthouse now, purchased with my own money and bearing only my name on the deed, watching the sunrise paint Manhattan in shades of gold and possibility. Cloudnex had been valued at $1.2 billion. The company I'd built in secret while being called worthless had become one of the fastest-growing tech empires in the world. Our latest acquisition, a European AI firm, had positioned us to revolutionize financial security across 3 continents. But the numbers, as impressive as they were, weren't what made me smile as I sipped my morning coffee. It was the email I'd received yesterday from a young woman named Maria Santos, a computer science student who'd seen my story and decided to launch her own startup instead of accepting a low-level position at a consulting firm. You showed me that being underestimated isn't a limitation, it's an opportunity to surprise the world. My phone buzzed with a text from Sophia. Brunch at 11? I have news about the gallery. Sophia had been thriving since my public revelation. With the financial backing I could now openly provide, she'd opened her own gallery in Chelsea, showcasing emerging artists who'd been overlooked by traditional institutions. Her opening night had drawn collectors, critics, and social media influencers who never paid attention to her work when she was just Isabella's sister. Now she was Sophia Torres, successful gallery owner and sister to one of the most powerful women in tech. The difference in how people treated her was both gratifying and infuriating, proof of how much the world's perception could shift based on perceived power. I arrived at our usual brunch spot to find Sophia already seated, her dark hair catching the light streaming through the restaurant's floor-to-ceiling windows. She looked up as I approached, her smile bright with excitement. "The Times wants to do a feature on the gallery," she announced before I'd even sat down. "Not as a sidebar to your story, but as a standalone piece about emerging art spaces in Chelsea." "That's incredible, Soph. You've built something beautiful." "We've both built something beautiful," she corrected, raising her mimosa, "to the Torres sisters, who refuse to stay small." As we clinked glasses, I thought about our childhood, about the parents who never believed in my potential, about the family dynamics that taught me to hide my ambitions. Sophia had been the only one who'd seen my worth before the world confirmed it. "I got a call from Dad yesterday," Sophia said quietly.
Our father had reached out tentatively after my Forbes cover, awkward and uncertain. Unlike Daniel and Helena, he wasn't asking for money or demanding explanations. He just wanted to understand how his daughter had become someone he'd never imagined she could be. "He's proud of you, Isabella. Confused, maybe, about how he missed seeing what you were building, but proud." I nodded, feeling a complicated mix of emotions about my father's belated recognition. Part of me wanted his validation, but a larger part had moved beyond needing anyone's approval except my own. "Speaking of calls," Sophia continued with a mischievous smile, "Anthony Vega has been asking about you." Anthony. Over the past months, our professional relationship has evolved into something more complex. The man who'd once asked me to fetch his coffee now sought my opinion on major business decisions. Our companies had partnered on 2 significant projects, and what had started as mutual respect was developing into something deeper. "He's brilliant," I admitted, "and he sees me as an equal." "More than an equal, Isabella, the way he looks at you when he thinks you're not paying attention." "We're colleagues, Sophia, successful colleagues who happen to enjoy each other's company." Successful colleagues don't spend 3 hours over dinner discussing market strategies that could have been covered in a 20-minute phone call. She wasn't wrong. My dinners with Anthony had become increasingly personal. Our conversations ranged from business innovation to childhood dreams, to the challenges of leading in industries that still questioned women's capabilities. He understood the weight of building something significant, the loneliness of making decisions that affected hundreds of people's livelihoods. But more than that, Anthony had never asked me to be smaller. He'd never suggested that my success threatened his masculinity or demanded that I dim my achievements to make him feel more comfortable.
When we disagreed on business strategies, he challenged my ideas with respect rather than condescension. I said yes because I'm not afraid of my own success anymore. After brunch, I walked through Central Park, reflecting on the journey that had brought me here. The studio apartment where Cloud Next began felt like another lifetime, inhabited by a woman who believed she had to hide her brilliance to be loved. That woman had been wrong about so many things. She thought safety lay in smallness, that love required self-diminishment, that success meant choosing between personal fulfillment and relationships. The truth was simpler and more beautiful. The right people would love you not despite your power, but because of it. The right partner would see your success as an addition to their life, not a threat to their identity. The right family would celebrate your achievements instead of trying to claim ownership of them. My phone rang as I approached my building. Victor's name appeared on the screen. Isabella, I just got off a call with the board. The Singapore expansion is approved, the Tokyo office is ahead of schedule, and 3 more Fortune 100 companies want to discuss exclusive partnerships. I smiled, looking up at the Meridian Tower where Cloud Next had its headquarters. My headquarters, my company, my empire built while others assumed I was powerless. Victor, do you ever think about what would have happened if I'd chosen differently? If I'd quit when Daniel demanded it? Never, he said without hesitation. Isabella, you were always going to choose yourself. That's what made you extraordinary long before the world recognized it. That evening, I stood in my home office, no longer a secret workspace, but a command center where I directed one of the most innovative companies in the world. On my desk sat the Forbes issue with my face on the cover, next to a photo of Sophia at her gallery opening, next to the framed note from Maria Santos, thanking me for showing her what was possible. I thought about Daniel, serving his prison sentence and finally understanding the magnitude of what he'd tried to destroy. About Helena, whose bitterness had ultimately revealed the strength she'd tried so hard to suppress in others. About the investors who'd dismissed my ideas, the executives who'd mistaken me for someone's assistant, the world that had underestimated me so completely.
All of them had given me the same gift, whether they'd intended to or not. They'd shown me that other people's limitations weren't mine to accept. They'd taught me that being underestimated was a form of freedom, freedom to build something extraordinary while no one was paying attention. Tomorrow, I would have dinner with Anthony, exploring the possibility of partnership with someone who saw my power as beautiful rather than threatening. Next week, I will announce Cloud Next's expansion into renewable energy technology. Next month, I would speak at a conference for young female entrepreneurs, sharing the story of how I'd built an empire while the world told me I was worthless. But tonight, I simply stood in my office, looking out at the city I'd conquered, and whispered the words I'd been waiting my whole life to say. I chose myself. And I won. The woman who'd been forced to choose between her career and her marriage had discovered something Daniel and Helena never understood. She'd never needed their permission to be extraordinary. She had only needed to stop asking for it. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.